Hello and welcome back to the StoreHero podcast. This week I'm joined by Jamie Clark, founder of Impact Evolve. And with that, I'll hand it over to yourself, Jamie. It'd be great to get an understanding of who you are, what you're up to, and what you work on at Impact Evolve.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Thomas. So Impact Evolve is a supply chain operations focused consultancy that was born out of my experience of working with typically founder-led brands. My role had always been kind of senior level supply chain operations director, COO type roles in brands like Hotel Chocolat, Beer 52, Bulk Nutrition. And the story behind all of them is that they'd scaled pretty quickly. They were all entrepreneurial, founder led. And the theme that I'd noticed throughout my career was that front end operations was always first to get the investment and time and effort and energy from founders or entrepreneurs. And naturally so, they're the areas that kind of drive revenue into your business and your brand. But the area that I was always responsible for leading was always kind of needing to catch up. And there was always areas that needed focus to help the business to scale either into new territories or open new sales channels. And my role was to make sure that there was the right capabilities, whether that was team, process, systems, infrastructure, capacity, buildings, all the things that kind of make the unsexy back end of the business work and tick on particularly well. So kind of getting 25 years into my career and having gone through that journey multiple times, I felt like I was going to be sadistic and go back into it with a consultancy and start my own business and do more of the types of things that I enjoyed doing, of working with brands that were going through that kind of growing, scaling phase, all of the kind of challenges that gets presented. And Impact Evolve came about 2 years ago. We've now got a portfolio of scaling brands in the kind of 1 to 50 million revenue range that are all doing some interesting and cool different things in their spaces. And our role is to help them to achieve what they're looking to do.
It's definitely not the most sexy part of the D2C business. I can attest to that one, but it's something we probably come across with brands an awful lot of the time as well, is that the primary focus of founders and even maybe the next hire is a paid media buyer, marketing, it's front end development. This side of the business is just very much forgotten about. We'll leave it off to somebody else. They'll sort it. That shouldn't be too hard to solve. In actual fact, it's a really, really complex piece of the puzzle. And if you get it wrong, it will render all of the effort that you've put into the front end of the business completely useless because you'll have unhappy customers, long lead times, and really the business just cannot function unless you're looking at it in a completely holistic view.
I really agree, yeah. And it's very often that we'll find the point in which we would get asked to come and work with a brand is a point in which they're trying to add too much complexity. So it's pretty straightforward to operate from a kind of single site with a few people selling down one or two different sales channels. But the minute a business starts to think, okay, we're at 5 million, but to get to 10, we're going to have to launch in Europe, or we're going to have to launch in the USA, new buildings, new sites, new skills required. The common mistake I see is kind of trying to do that with the existing team and not building the infrastructure out accordingly to help that to happen. And that's where, as you said, you start to see rising costs, failed deliveries, etc., etc. The list goes on.
And why couldn't the existing team do that if they've done it in their domestic country?
I think what I find quite a lot, certainly in early stage brands, is that you'll know yourself when you start a business that it's important to you probably hire a team of generalists. You can't afford to have a team of specialists at that relatively early stage. So understanding when you need to go from generalist to specialist is a really, really important point. There's no silver bullet or no right or wrong answer, but recognizing that there's either more volume or more complexity, or usually both, means you either need more skill, different skill, again, usually both. And that's an area that can be quite challenging, certainly challenging on founders, where perhaps those team of generalists have really helped them scale from 0 to 5 million. But are they the right people to take them from 5 to 10? Maybe or may not be, but that's a really kind of pulling on the heartstrings decision for a founder to take when that person's done a lot of work for them to get them to the place in which they're at today.
Yeah, and it's mind share as well. The existing people, the generalists in the business are doing a very specific job, and to think about the structure that needs to go into a business to again get it from 5 to 10 to 20, whatever it's going to be. The back end infrastructure that needs to go into place there will make or break that growth trajectory that they're going to put in place. So taking people away from maybe their day to day will also maybe prohibit the brand from getting to that next step as well. So yeah, I think just getting specialists in, like you've kind of alluded to there, is such a crucial step. Um, I suppose one interesting point, and I think you've kind of touched on it there, typically around the 5 million mark. Now, I'm sure that's very, very different depending on average order value sizes and complexities related to geography and that kind of thing. But is there a specific point where things seem to break in your experience?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, it's hard to try and put a pin in what's the revenue number because there are so many different moving parts to it. But I do think it comes down to complexity. And that comes in the form of the number of sites that you're looking to fulfill from, the number of channels that you're looking to service, the number of territories that you're looking to supply to. Each one of those comes with a different level of complexity and challenge. And perhaps you're also challenged with a volume complexity to add on top of that as well, which means you might be running out of capacity. Normally, all of those things happen at the same time. And that's quite often a point in which we would get called in to help understand, one, how do we kind of unravel the challenge that we've created today, but also then how do we create a roadmap that's going to take us successfully from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20, if that's the case. And more often than not, it's not what to do, it's the order in which to do it in that makes the difference on success or not. So recognizing that we can't do everything, there isn't an infinite amount of resource. We have to really narrow our focus and thinking down into the dial turning activities and exercises. But saying that to, an entrepreneur is quite difficult. I'm the same. I want to do everything yesterday, so I have to take a piece of my own medicine. But, having those conversations, we're quite comfortable kind of saying, look, you're putting yourself at risk if you do this, this and this. But actually, if we thought about it this way, here is a route through.
And are you guys getting involved in like advice around like how to maybe set up your ERP separately when you are thinking about maybe international expansion or expansion to multiple sites? Because again, it's definitely not something I would have come across before at Shopify when you're trying to speak with brands that were looking to, grow international. To your point, founders are often impatient. They see the opportunity and they want to just move yesterday. But there's so much of a logistical process from all the points you touched on, along with the tooling and the software to even funnel all of the orders, or make sure everything that's going to even happen on those sites happen from a technology perspective as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's often one of the biggest unknowns in a business. You'll probably know yourself that brands in that kind of 1 to 5 or even 1 to 10 million revenue range are probably hung together with Google Sheets or Excel sheets. Disconnected information, siloed working from a team perspective, from a behaviours perspective. And actually the biggest challenge is how do you bring all of that together in a much more connected way? And the exam question that gets posed quite a lot to us is, when is the time for ERP? And should we go, we're 5 million, we've got all of these Google Sheets, we need to consolidate, we want to do this, this and this. That feels like the answer, and it may be, but it is worth doing the due diligence. What you don't want to do is lose your agility as you're growing and scaling. That's often the kind of USP of a business. You can react and respond. Naturally, implementing an ERP is going to restrict you somewhat as to the ways in which you can work. So finding that sweet spot between connecting apps, connecting data, finding integrations, and the roadmap from 50 Google Sheets to more systemized way of working is a really intricate puzzle to solve.
It's an absolute beast. I remember I was working with one client for probably 2 years at Shopify, and when I started working with them, they were in the middle of their ERP implementation. When I finished working with them, they were still in the middle of the ERP implementation. So it is a beast. And depending on the nature of the business, the size, and I suppose the stage at which you even engage in a conversation like that, it's going to just take on a life of its own. So it's, yeah.
Do you know what? Look, one of the biggest challenges is not, as I said, not necessarily knowing what to do, but has the team got the bandwidth to take on something of that magnitude? And you often get 20% of the way into the project and you think, Christ, what have I bitten off? And sometimes that's where Impact Evolve will get called in to say, look, we need you to help come in and kind of make sure that we're project managing and implementing this successfully. It's not that we don't know what we're doing, we just purely do not have the bandwidth. We've got to keep the wheels on the bus. That's just as important, I think, as landing the things that are going to help you grow and scale.
Kind of leads me on to my next question, I suppose. Like, when typically are you brought in? And secondly to that, maybe more so to the point, what are some of the biggest problems or the typical problems that you run into when you engage with the brand for the first time?
Yeah, I think it very much comes back to you don't know what you don't know. And I think smart leaders often will recognize that perhaps they didn't get involved in business or launch their product to be good at supply chain and operations and logistics. But that it becomes a really, really important factor in their business as they reach a certain point. Those people that have got a really good foresight to that will ask for advice and guidance and help, and that can come in a number of different forms. We often are asked to run a kind of end-to-end audit on the current as-is situation and identify the gaps both in technology or in technology and process, in systems, in infrastructure, equipment, buildings, that where they're at today to where they need to get to double in size, for example, and again, what's that roadmap to in each of those different work streams to help them get to where they've got to get to. So that's kind of very often what we get called in for. It's help us understand what that roadmap is, and then can you help us implement it as well, because either we don't have the bandwidth or we don't have the skill.
If I was a £5 million brand right now, what are some of the potential red flags I should be looking out for?
Yeah, often they present themselves in, I would call them the obvious, but rising fulfillment costs. They're obvious to me because I see them, I guess, quite a lot. But rising fulfillment costs, failed deliveries, Trustpilot responses going down, running out of capacity, over inventory, under stocks, and that kind of leads me to where I think kind of one of the biggest challenges is in kind of business in those early stages is really understanding how to optimize an inventory plan and strategy. So what should we buy? Where should we buy it from? How should we bring that into our business? What's the most tax efficient and effective way of getting that to our warehouse or warehouses? Who should the freight partners be? And how much should we buy? And in what combination? Because you've often either got to go through things like a secondary bottling plant or a fulfillment operation or a value-added exercise somewhere that adds further complexity. So really balancing supply and demand is an area that early stage startup businesses really need to think about, because it could really sink you if you end up with a whole bunch of inventory tying cash up on the shelf that's not converting into money that you can use. Then that's a real challenge for brands that probably not blessed with a huge amount of cash.
Absolutely, and it's definitely something that we're seeing consistently with brands as well, is that just massive overstocks, unfortunately, in inventory. And on the opposite is even probably a bigger problem or a headache for brands is understocks when you have a product that is flying.
Yeah, I think kind of over time, if you think about the obvious areas of a warehouse or a supply chain that are well understood, you can work your way backwards from the carriers and the final mile. I think most people are exposed to how they work because they're consumers of it. Warehouses are warehouses. Whilst there's a whole bunch of complexity that goes on within it, people broadly know the principles of what goes on in a warehouse. And then I think kind of the earlier part of the supply chain is the bit that's really misunderstood. There's very little understanding of what goes on, what good looks like from a kind of procurement perspective, or from a building the right contracts and vendor relationships to inbound freight. And that whole supply and demand piece is because end consumers are less exposed to that area. They've got no reason to be thinking about it. They just assume perhaps something just turns up and you use a carrier and it gets to your door. But there's a whole bunch of other kind of value-adding exercises that has to go on in what I call the primary supply chain for that to be successful and for that product to actually make money for you.
And is that you assisting brands with that on an international kind of procurement level as well?
Yeah, we do. We're working with 2 or 3 brands at the moment where we're helping to build out their supply and demand planning capabilities. That comes in the form of building kind of dashboards, reporting. I always come back to you can't control what you can't see. So removing blind spots in your supply chain is such an important factor, from understanding the landed costs to the sold costs to the margin. You'll know this is your wheelhouse, but it's often the area that's not as understood. We all know what the carrier costs, we all know what the labour costs in the warehouse, but how much does it cost when a product sits on a shelf for 8 months and not being sold? And what is the impact to do on margin? So getting the right product in at the right time for the right time period is absolutely crucial.
Any tips for brands that will be like sourcing their products internationally, whether it's, in China, Vietnam, Turkey, whatever it's going to be? Like, is there any top tips or good pieces of advice you would say to brand owners when they are looking to source their raw materials from other countries?
Yeah, I think first of all, I mean, it may sound damn obvious, but obviously these things are subject to quite long lead times, which, at the
Mm,
best of times could also then be subject to delays. So planning kind of worst case is really important. Thinking about the implications and scenario planning, what might go wrong, is also really important. But, the obvious thing is, look, you don't want to be using air freight if possible. That means usually you've either been hit with a spike in demand or something that's, unplanned because it's incredibly costly. Can you get things on boats and trains is a mode of transport that's not always considered. It's really kind of starting to.
or some ships have got stuck in the Suez Canal or something like that.
Indeed, yeah. Trains are building a strong reputation now. You can get things moved from kind of China to the UK in 3 to 4 weeks, as
Wow.
opposed to 12, 14, 15, 16 weeks on a boat. But it's nowhere near the cost of air freight. So, it's definitely a mode of transport that I would recommend people look into if the product itself is, suitable for that mode. But yeah, it's an area that's not always well understood.
Nice. I suppose we're recording this on the 9th of August, not a million miles away from Black Friday, but everything you've touched on there, I suppose I want to dig into even the implications on understocking and overstocking. How does one even think about trying to, particularly for a scaling brand who's growing year on year, whereas last year's data, mightn't necessarily mean a whole lot because we're growing so quickly. How do you balance, I suppose, forecasts for BFCM with, trying to be somewhat prudent around your cash flow with your inventory levels and trying to get that balance between understocked and overstocked? No one's ever going to get it completely right, obviously, but trying to get it with some degree of certainty is obviously the goal for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. I think first thing I would say is don't take this on in a singular exercise in one team. So, for example, your operations manager or your supply chain manager shouldn't be sitting to try and burden this responsibility on their own. There
Mm,
are a whole bunch of other disciplines within the business that are going to ultimately influence the decisions that you take around what you buy and how much and where and when. So bring those people in. Share the burden. Think about who's responsible for marketing. Do we understand the marketing campaigns? Do we understand the kind of maximum that's going to drive, the minimum it's going to drive? Have we talked to our carriers about the implications of that minimum and maximum? Have we looked at what that means from a resource perspective in the warehouse, either our own or the 3PL? And do we have the right measures to see how we're performing against those minimums and maximums so that we can try and change direction if possible? If we can't see it, then it's really hard to change direction in flight. But if you've got the right visibility of your supply chain, it gives you a fighting chance of saying that's not quite responding or reacting how we'd expected. These are the levers we've got available to us to either delay products or increase products or let our carriers know things are changing. So definitely make it a shared responsibility. Bring all of the different disciplines together. If you get it right, you all get it right, and if you get it wrong, you get it wrong together. And no one should feel the burden of the pressures of planning for Black Friday and Cyber Monday on its own. They would be my points to certainly think through.
Are you able to give any instances where brands have just got this wrong?
I can give you an instance where I've got it wrong. Um,
Even better.
Probably the worst experience of my career, I would say. It probably goes back 12, 13 years ago to early days at Hotel Chocolat. We were a growing brand. We'd gone from sort of 10 million to 70 million. I'd had a couple of promotions within the business. I'd just taken over a new fulfillment center, which was responsible for servicing the subscription and direct consumer market, which was global. So we were selling multi-channel into 100 stores, 100,000 subscribers, subscription, probably, I think we were doing sort of 10, 15,000 D2C orders a week. So a whole bunch of complexity to deal with. And I didn't have this level of insight that I've just described to you. I was a lot younger in my career. I didn't fully plan it. I didn't fully understand the implications of getting it wrong. We went into it with our eyes shut a little bit. Everything had gone well in my career up to that point. I thought, I'm sailing, everything is good. I'm winning in my life and in my career. And I hadn't really been given the exposure to what a real decent Black Friday, Cyber Monday planning cycle needed to look like. And it is fair to say that I got it entirely wrong from a resource perspective, from an equipment perspective. We were just not able to service the amount of D2C orders that we got. And as a result, we failed orders. I was constantly staying behind late with the team. They were stressed. I was stressed. I was going home not sleeping. I was worried. It was only lucky that I had good support around me in terms of the leaders in the business and fessing up and saying, I need your help here. This is getting out of control. And I genuinely was caring and worried about not servicing the customers because I cared about my job. But it was a big lesson for me to think, okay, our business here does 70% of its revenue in 8 weeks.
Yeah.
We started planning that from January every year onwards, from talking to how we onboarded our staff, our temporary staff, which tripled in size. I think we went from 50 to 150 people. So we had to start bringing those people in 2 to 3 months in advance. We needed an extra 20 computers, so we had to buy them early. We had to test them. We made sure the systems worked. We stress tested it. The entire layout of the warehouse needed to change. Carriers had to be brought in on induction days, so we talked to them about exactly what pull times we expected from them. We knew if they were going to be late. We had fail-safe mechanisms in place. We tested systems in case they would go down, and we knew what we would do in the event of a kind of power out. So we had plans and contingency plans for everything because it was such an important part of the business. If Black Friday or Christmas failed for that particular business, there was no recovering it. The entire year was gone. And I felt that burden, and I was just lucky I had people around me that kind of said, yeah, it's fine, we'll figure it out. But yeah, my God, that scarred me. And ever since that day, I have planned the life out of Black Fridays, Cyber Mondays, Christmas. And it's been really clear for everyone what was expected. And, that's the advice I now give to our clients.
Apologies.
I
just need to double check. A second here, sorry, but I've no idea what happened there. The laptop just shut. Great timing.
I assume you'll be able to cut that.
Yeah, guessing. Yeah, it should all be there. Okay, we just continue from there. We can cut out that little bit anyway.
Just still talking and finish the kind of Black Friday, Cyber Monday bit, I think.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, that sounds like quite an intense learning curve, Jamie. I mean, yeah, wow. I mean, even from again, it's something that we've come across with some brands. I mean, remember even last year there was probably 2 or 3 brands that, the seasonal split probably wouldn't have been as dramatic as 70% in 8 weeks, but somewhere around the 55, 60% in that kind of 8 week in the lead up to BFCM, lead up to Q4, whatever you want to call it. 2 of those brands, would have quiet summers, like a lot of ecom brands. We're really kind of depending on really knocking it out of the park for BFCM to fill the backlog that came from a massively bumper Black Friday and even the first week of December, where that last week before Christmas, I'm not even talking the 25th to the 19th, but like the 19th to the 12th, they should have been still full on in sale mode there. It does tend to die off a little bit, but that week of revenue was probably 2.5 months in summer revenue, and even at a much better customer acquisition cost. And it was just very, very unfortunate. But again, I think it boiled down to maybe just inexperience, I suppose, and maybe not just having planned as efficiently and as effectively maybe as they could have.
And I talked about supply and demand planning earlier in the chat, and ultimately that's what Black Friday, Cyber Monday is. It's about knowing, if marketing are pulling levers, what might be the impact of that, and how do we connect that so that we can make better procurement, buying, supply decisions, and make sure all of our supply partners are connected to the likely outcomes that we're expecting. And if you haven't got good connected systems, and then you don't connect it via people and process, then the outcomes are the things that we've just described.
Okay. Really, really interesting. And if you were to say, I suppose, like the resource planning piece is very difficult. I'm imagining from you mentioning that you kind of were looking after the new warehouse. All of that fulfillment was being done in-house by you guys. It was your own warehouse, your own resource planning, all that kind of thing. When brands, and a lot of the brands that we're working with now, would outsource that component of the business to a 3PL, is this something that the brand should just say, look, these guys have it? Or what kind of checks and balances should they speak to about with their 3PL? Like one thing I think brands often overlook is, telling the 3PL that we're planning a massive drop or a massive sale on a certain time or day, because I mean, just assuming that they'll handle it. But I mean, depending on the size of the brand, it's a very massive oversight, really.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of the work that we do at Impact Evolve is working with definitely 3PLs in one way or another, but often very much it's about moving brands between 3PLs that are either looking for their first fulfillment partner, moving from an in-house solution to a 3PL, or that the relationship's broken down with the existing 3PL and they want to move to another one. So when we get underneath the skin of it, you know what, 9 times out of 10, it is as much the brand's fault as it is the 3PL's fault as to why the relationship has broken down. And very often that's just a naivety of not understanding what each other needs to be, successfully setting each other up for success. So, it might be the thought process that we're going to give this to a 3PL, we're going to give all our demand, our source of fulfillment, and all our problems are over, and we can focus on developing the front end of the business. But actually it becomes really much more complicated, because those 3PLs need to truly plug into your marketing team. They need to understand what, how demand and supply might look for them. Their entire business is built on quite razor thin margins, and that's dependent upon having the right number of people to service the right number of orders at the right time for you, or for the brand. And that's misunderstood often. So, the exam question for that for me is always, how do you set your 3PL up for success? What is it that they need from you? And how do you connect with them to build a proper partnership as opposed to a transactional relationship? And that is a skill that isn't always understood, or we see play out as successfully as we would like. And our very first response when we get called in is, can we recover this? Can we put a series of structured meetings in so that we've got the right tools, the templates, measuring the right metrics that gives each other the best chance of success? And then only then should we judge whether it's the right partner for each other or not. It's very costly to move warehouses. You want to avoid it if you can.
What are some of the signs of a very good 3PL and a very bad 3PL?
I'd hate to say.
Not very bad, but maybe, what are the signs of a good one?
Yeah, I think, a good one will be challenging you, and asking you perhaps things that you never even thought were a thing. So if you haven't got a good, clean set of master data to hand into your 3PL, they should be coming back to you and saying, we're missing this product information, we're missing your weights, we're missing your dimensions. What's going to happen when you change ranges? How do we close down these SKUs and introduce these SKUs, new SKUs? They're often questions that you may never have even asked yourself. You may not have even had to think about. But good master data, good forecasting capabilities, good weekly or monthly sessions to understand what the marketing teams are doing and how you can then share that information with the 3PL. If you're not doing that as a brand, a good 3PL should be challenging you and saying, these are your gaps. These are the things that you need to set us up for success. A 3PL that's perhaps not so good would just act as a transactional relationship with you. They would just continue to do their best with the information you've served up to them. So if both partners don't know what good looks like, then that's where you'll see the relationship break down, and no one kind of applying healthy tension to each other to kind of drive themselves forward. So it's a little bit blind leading the blind.
Yeah, no.
And a good partner will absolutely make sure that they make that transparent for you.
Fair. No, really, really good advice. I'm seeing it with a lot of brands that they've only really started to get involved with 3PLs, I suppose, as a way of just, trying to think about how they can optimize their operational expenses from a D2C level. Really, a lot of brands would have, so in a lot of cases, unnecessarily their own premises and warehouse staff managing it 365, and then just trying to expect people to do 18-hour days for 6 weeks at the end of the year, where it's not very sustainable piece for A, the staff, or B, the business, to have people sitting there for the rest of the year as well. So I think it's a conversation a lot of people are really starting to get into, even more so in the past 18 months.
For sure. It's such an important discipline or practice to get your marketing teams to work closely with your fulfillment teams, whether your fulfillment is a 3PL or in-house. Bringing those teams together, giving them insights to what's important to each other, how each other operates, why they need certain things, and blending that kind of skill set, building a relationship there, I would say is a really, really important factor to really consider, as your business scales and grows.
Yeah, 100%. You touch on so many different areas of back office, from like procurement, full supply chain, 3PL, even like advising brands on tech and ERP implementation to a certain extent is quite a lot.
It is. It's good fun though.
Fun for the right person, I'm sure. That's really good. Jamie, if people are looking to get in contact with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, for sure. So website is www.impactevolve.co.uk. You'll definitely find us active on LinkedIn, either on my personal page or the business page. They're the best two places to get hold of us, or drop us an inquiry via the website, or drop us an email. My email address is jamie.clark@impactevolve.co.uk. Always happy to speak to potential leads or people that are just looking to bounce some ideas or make new connections in the ecosystem to reach out. I'm always happy to help if I can.
Brilliant. We'll leave a link to the Impact Evolve website and your own LinkedIn in the show notes as well. But listen, Jamie, really, really enjoyed that chat and looking forward to catching up again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me on here, Thomas. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to working with you and speaking to you again in a bit.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers.